What's up everybody, my name's Justin Fischetti and today I'm going to show you how to make this European decanter. Here we go. I start off by designing the piece. I like to pull inspiration from places around me. In this case, I got my inspiration from the Greek pottery exhibit in the Museum of Fine Art in Boston. This will be the design for the main feature ring, and this is the design of the overall decanter. I'll be referencing this throughout the video to help explain which parts I'm working on. First up are the body rings. These are going to be made out of Katolox. These are what make up the majority of the decanter. The first step is to get all of the pieces down to the correct dimensions. Then I can take them over to the table saw and cut angles on each side of each piece. This will allow them to fit into a ring, much like slices of pizza fit into a pizza pie. With all of the pieces cut for all of the body rings, I can lay them out into rings and begin gluing them. Here you can see how the angles make them form into a ring. The angles did not come out exactly right, so I'm using dowels in between the two halves when I clamp the ring in order to allow all the other joints to be tight. I'll clean up this interface later on. Next up is the main feature ring. This ring will be made out of cherry and Katolox, so the first thing I'm going to do is break down the material. This ring is made by gluing up strips of Katolox and cherry into different boards. Each board has a different pattern, and then when combined, they result in the main feature ring. So the first step is to glue up some of these boards. I'm using a bunch of spring clamps for this glue up, which is ideal because it allows me to perfectly align the top and bottom of these two pieces. This is going to be critical for making a tight pattern. All the parts can be run through the planer to get them to the final dimension. When adding this layer on, it's critically important that I get this joint right here lined up exactly with this joint, otherwise the pattern is going to look off. So now to make sure this happens, I'm spreading regular wood glue on the surfaces like I normally would, and then I'm going to use CA glue to secure the piece exactly where I want it once I get it lined up. This will stop slipping from happening when I apply clamps. And then a little bit of cleanup. With one face clean, I can run it through the planer to get the other face parallel. Here the pattern is almost done, and it can be clearly seen how all of the pieces are stacked together. The pattern is fully glued up, so I'm going to square off this block with the table saw so I can bring it over to the jointer and make these two faces parallel. From there, I'll be able to cut the segments out of this long piece and make them into a ring. I can then cut off the end to reveal the pattern. So the pattern is fully glued up in what kind of reminds me of a sausage. So now I'm going to take slices of it, and then I will put angles on those slices so that they can form into a ring. With the pattern sliced up, I can now take each piece and cut angles on them so that they will fit into a ring to form the main feature ring. I just did a test fit up with all of the spacer pieces, and all of the joints are looking perfect, so now I can move on to an actual glue up. With the main feature ring done, I can move on to the triangular spikes. This pattern was inspired by a pattern that appears a lot in Greek pottery. With this piece, I really wanted to allow history to guide me in how to design the part. The construction of the pattern starts by gluing together pieces of maple and Katolox. So to make this pattern, it's easier to glue up two pieces of wood and then cut angles on it to form the triangles than trying to glue up pieces that are already at angles. So now that I have the glued up block, I can make cuts like this, and then a cut here like this, then another cut here like this, then a cut here like this. And now you can see the triangle shape. I just completed an angle cut, and that's the only angle cut I need to make. Now I can turn this on its side and add in two 90-degree cuts, and you can begin to see the pattern. This pattern will be paired with a reciprocal one, and that will give the spikes. With the strips all squared up, I can now cut them into pieces. Two of these pieces will be used to make a single segment. The two rings with this pattern are significantly different in size, so the pieces that make them up are also very different. With those strips cut up, now I can glue two of them together to form what will be the final segment. You can see how the triangle pattern will come together, and next what I will do is cut angles like this on the piece so that it can form into a ring. With the glue dry, I can go back over to the table saw to cut the angles on the pieces. I'm using a toggle clamp on a table saw sled that will hold the parts at exactly the right angle. Admittedly, this is how I should have cut the angles on the main feature ring. And with all the angles cut, I can glue all the segments into a ring. In order to make this zigzag pattern, I'm going to make the segments have horizontal stripes and then put vertical filler pieces between them during glue up. So you can see that this will be one segment with a small horizontal maple piece and a thick horizontal cherry piece. Then when I go to glue up the ring, I will add in vertical maple pieces to create the zigzag pattern. And now I can cut the pieces out. Notice how I'm using a piece of tape as the stop block. I find this is a really accurate way to cut the segments to the correct length. I'm using it here also to cut the accent pieces that will go between each of the segments to create the zigzag pattern. And with all the pieces cut, I can glue them up. I made sure to cut the vertical accent pieces taller than the segments so that those are what get sanded down instead of the segments. This will make for a more consistent pattern. Sometimes the angles don't come out exactly perfect, so what I like to do is glue the rings into two halves and then take them over the table saw and cut a straight edge on both sides of the ring. This allows for a perfect joint. The two halves then can be glued up either using a hose clamp or a traditional clamp that is perpendicular to the cut edge. I can then take all of the rings over to the disc sander that I have mounted on my lathe and sand the faces flat. I'm only sanding one face of the rings flat. If I were to try to do two faces, there's no guarantee the two faces would be parallel, which would mess up the shape of the decanter. I like to use accent rings between multiple feature rings, as I find it helps to separate them and give them their own life. The accent rings on this piece are just Katolox and maple glued together. They really help to distinguish and separate multiple rings. With all of the rings done, I can now make the base out of solid Katolox. I didn't have a piece big enough, so I'm gluing up multiple pieces. I also glued on pine strips because the pieces of the bottom were not long enough to run through the planer. I can then cut it into a circle. With it all cut out, I can mount it to a lathe and true up this face. I can then take the first body ring and add some glue to it and mount it onto the base. I'm using the tailstock for clamping force. As I mentioned earlier, I now true up this face to make it parallel to the face I sanded on the disc sander. Now I can add the captured rectangles. This is added in the same manner as the first body ring. Sanding across the diameter ensures a parallel face. I can now move on to mounting the main feature ring. To do this, I first hot glue it to a piece of plywood that has concentric circles, so it tells me where exactly it needs to be. I then use the tailstock as a locating pin and clamp it to the already assembled parts. And with about 5 rings assembled, I can begin shaping the outside to how I like it. I like to wait to shape the outside until I have a couple rings added, so that I kind of have a feel for where I need to take away material. And once again, I can true up the face of the main feature ring so I can add on the next ring. With the outside shape beginning to be defined, I can now turn down the inside. And this process of adding rings continues. Now with a couple more rings added, I can begin to define the outside shape even more. You can begin to see the triangle pattern taking shape here. As the decanter begins to grow longer and longer, I begin using a steady rest that I made out of some scrap plywood. It's designed just like others that are on the market today, but this design has some fundamental flaws. In order to effectively dampen any vibrations that are caused by turning with the steady rest, the wheels have to be engaged with a certain amount of pressure. The problem with this is it's almost impossible to get the pressure on each of the wheels the exact same, which leads to a deflection of the workpiece. This is an absolute disaster because it means that the part that you're turning with the steady rest engaged is not concentric with the part that is turned without the steady rest. This can lead to an entire failure of a part. This is a fundamental flaw of any steady rest that has independently actuated wheels. I decided that I want to address this issue, so I've come up with something really cool. I'm not ready to announce it quite yet, but if you click on the link in the description or in the pop-out banner in the top right corner of your screen, you can sign up to be the first to know about this awesome new solution I've come up with that I'm going to be announcing soon. I'm really excited about this, and I think that any wood turner will really love this idea. And now I can finish off the decanter with a bit of sanding and some finish. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to hit that link in the description to be the first to find out about the new steady rest solution I have coming.